Yes, I know that Riot revealed the new champion, but this week I wanted to take a little bit of a break. So, because I already had this video recorded, this one is coming out first. Rel will have to wait, but we'll have a look at her bio and her voice lines next time. Still, let me just say, this was an obvious one. What surprised me though, is that a lot of people didn't even know that this character was already part of the lore. And this kinda pushed me into making a video on a topic which I wanted to talk about for quite a while now. And that topic is side characters who are likely to become champions one day. We already made a video on this 9 months ago, and then even 3 years ago. But since then, Riot released so many stories, and they set up so many new characters, that now we have a lot more to talk about. Not to mention that recently, Riot's been on a side character into champion turning spree, with the likes of Senna or Yone. In fact, if you guys like this video, there is plenty of characters to make part 2 or even part 3 of this video. But for today, I picked 5 characters which are absolutely most likely to become champions at some point. And because I don't want to prolong this anymore, let's get right into it. As I mentioned, Riot has an incredible amount of interesting characters in their world. But not all of them would make an interesting champion. That's why the characters on my list are special. And every one of them are unique somehow, which also makes them worthy of becoming champions. So starting with the least likely, but still very likely character to become a champion, we have one of the old gods of Freljord. It's a vague one, but this is absolutely going to happen. In fact, if I had to bet on a specific primal god, it would either be the Seal Sister, who was originally mentioned by Ornn, or the more likely new champion would be the Iron Boar. Just like the crazy people worship Volibear, the travelers worship Anivia, and the smiths worship Ornn, many other barbarians worship the Iron Boar, with perhaps the best example being Tryndamere's clan. In Tryndamere's bio, it is mentioned that when Aatrox first came to these barbarians, some of them knelt before him, because they thought that Aatrox was their boar god. Another time, this primal god was mentioned by Udyr. In the Silence for the Damned story, in a scene where Udyr was shifting through his stances to taunt the Volibear, Udyr also shifted into the Iron Boar. So should Udyr get a rework in the future, at the very least, we will see hints towards this god in his new abilities. Next up, we have an even more likely character to become a champion in the future, Aliye K'Vunnlan. Now, as I mentioned this name, I am pretty sure most of you will have no idea who this is. But let me refresh your memory. This is Aliye. I know he doesn't look like a great hero or someone who should become a champion, but his story tells us the opposite. In case you forgot, Ixtal is a region with a very unique story. After the fall of Icathia, the Ixtali were involved in trying to clean up the void corruption that was spreading from that place. In fact, the great ascended mage of Ixtal, called Nezuk, built a floating city that was supposed to burn the void from Runeterra with magic. Unfortunately, his plans failed. The void was too strong, and so his city came crashing down, and forcing Nezuk to flee for his life. Here's the thing though, if I didn't have other characters to talk about, I would put Nezuk on this list. In Malphite's story, it was mentioned that after this grand creation crashed into the ground, Nezuk fled the scene. Which means that technically Nezuk might be alive somewhere in Shurima. And since Ezreal is currently wearing one of the magical gloves of Nezuk, should Nezuk become a champion, there would already be established story and drama with other champions. But Nezuk isn't the one I wanted to talk about today, because Nezuk would be quite an obvious choice for many of you. So back to the story of Ixtal. You see, after the most powerful mage of Ixtal failed in a battle against the Void, the rest of Ixtal agreed that there is no way they would be able to stop the spreading of the Void. And so, instead of fighting it, they raised giant walls of plants around the nation, which effectively isolated them from the rest of the world. And Ixtal stayed like this to the present days. So right now, the people of Ixtal believe that the outside world was entirely consumed by the Void, and they believe that they are the only survivors on Runeterra. Now here's the catch. The most powerful mages of Ixtal know that there is a living world outside, but they can't just tell everyone about it, because after living in isolation for entire lifetimes, should they reveal the truth to the common people, they would likely go insane. That's why only the most powerful mages get to know about it, because their minds are able to comprehend it. And this is how we get back to Aliye Kunlan. Aliye was one of the most recent mages who passed the test of the Vidalion, which is a ritual during which a mage literally weaves their robes from pure magic. And should they succeed at that, they would be accepted into the highest circle of Ishtali mages. But not only that, after passing the trial, the one who's believed to be the current most powerful mage in Ishtal, Kiana, took interest in Aliye, and she personally took him aside to reveal her plans to him. Kiana wants to tear down the walls which isolate Ishtal, and she wants the Empire to bloom again. And should that happen, should the Empire of Ishtal reveal itself to the world, we will likely see Aliye again. Next up, with the recent confirmations regarding the political structures of Noxus, of course, the Faceless got on the menu. You see, for a very long time, it was believed that the third member of the Noxian leadership was LeBlanc in disguise. There were some mentions on Twitter that the Faceless is not LeBlanc. But since we were told to always follow the rule, if it's not on universe, it is not canon, up until recently there was no proof. And so, the Faceless being LeBlanc was still a likely outcome. However, after the proclamation of the Triforix, things got different. There it was revealed that after Swain seized Noxus, and after he established the new leadership, he put himself on the highest council to represent Vision. To gain the trust of the Noxian people, he put Darius there to represent Might, and for the last member, Swain got in contact with the Noxian assassin guilds, and these noble houses chose the Faceless to represent them in the Triforix Council. Now, since the Faceless come from the assassin guilds, and they are experienced in subtlety, the point of the Faceless is to seek out the cultists of the Black Rose in the shadows of the Empire. But here's the thing, we actually don't know who the Faceless are or how they behave. Since it was reported that the assassin guilds put the Faceless there, does that mean that all the guilds agreed on one person, the ultimate assassin? Or is the Faceless a combination of different representatives? For example, most of the times the Faceless are surrounded by heavily armed guards, but sometimes they are surrounded by their own hooded copies. So that when they are in a crowd, people won't even know which one is the real one. Now, the stories always mention how the Faceless is standing in the middle, and it hints at the people around them being their closest followers. But what if the Faceless can have multiple copies? Because the Faceless are actually like 4 or 5 different assassins. That would be the only alternative to accepting that the Faceless can create illusions suspiciously just like LeBlanc. To really give you a feeling of who the Faceless are in the story, let me quote the Principles of Strength, the part where the main character, Alisa, met the Triforix Council. The third figure, only ever referred to as the Faceless, was a mystery. This individual sat unmoving, bedecked from head to toe in many layered voluminous robe. They wore a blank, staring, glossy black mask, and even the eye holes were obscured with dark mesh, giving away nothing as to their identity. Their hands too were concealed, hidden in sleeves of thick fabric. Alisa thought she perceived a vaguely feminine aspect to the mask, but that might simply have been the way it happened to catch the light. As you can see, not only is Riot making sure to really hide the identity of this character, but surely, after reading this description, you can't blame me for thinking that this was LeBlanc in disguise. You know, the only other woman in Noxus who walks around with other similarly hooded figures. Now, before we move away from this character, I should quickly address the one card in Legends of Runeterra. You see, even though it was confirmed that the Faceless are not LeBlanc, the card representing Guile still pictures LeBlanc. Luckily, we got an explanation for this too. On Twitter, replying to this card specifically, Lori Golding revealed that many different of their products may be teasing many different things that might happen. So here, Guile represented by LeBlanc could mean two things. Either the Triforix believes that the Faceless are the most Guile-ish person they know, while in reality LeBlanc is just better, and she is the real representation of Guile in Noxus. Or it may be teasing that the Faceless will get manipulated by LeBlanc eventually. Regardless of the outcome, 2 of the 3 Triferic's councilmen are playable characters, and I would love to see the Faceless join them. And now we are getting into the 2 characters who are extremely likely to become champions at some point in the future. Still, I will start with one that is a little bit less likely to get there. Arjun of the Arbor Mark. This has to be one of the most interesting side characters to be ever added into Runeterra. Not only is Arjun himself a really cool character, but with his arrival, we learned about an entire new nation that's somewhere between Demacia and Noxus. And we learned about the unique relationship Demacia has with these people. This small nation is called the Arbor Mark, and despite the Arbor Mark being full of mages, Demacia doesn't hunt them down. In fact, against all odds. Demacians are allied with the Arbor Mark, and there is a good reason why. You see, these 2 nations have a long history of kinda living beside each other, without ever attacking the other side. So really, Demacians don't have a reason to start a new war. On top of that, as was explained in the Turmoil story, which happened right after Silas escaped the prison, every time Demacia has a problem with mages, they ask the Arbor Mark for help. After all, who else could help them with a mage problem than the expert on this topic? A mage. And when Silas escaped and started the Demacian civil war, Arjun was the mage who traveled to Demacia to help them with the Mage Rebellion. And of course, the Arbor Mark are familiar with the Demacian laws of stone. So when Arjun entered the Demacian lands, he swore he wouldn't use magic, he would only advise them. Now, as I already mentioned, Arjun is actually a really cool character. As he traveled with the Demacian escort, he kept telling dad jokes which none of the Demacians laughed at. Not because the jokes wouldn't be funny, but because the escort was nervous around him. He was a powerful mage after all. But he also occasionally used magic while no one was looking. However, he only did it to save someone's life. So the story really showed how kind-hearted he was. The best thing about this, however, is that Arjun was introduced into the world of Runeterra through the eyes of Cytheria. She was one of the soldiers escorting Arjun to the capital. And here I would like to quote a bit of the Turmoil story. The part where she saw Arjun for the first time. The envoy dismounted and strode forward, smiling broadly. He had the heavily muscled build of a soldier or a smith, definitely not what she expected of a mage. She always imagined them as sneaking, cunning types, preferring subtlety and trickery to physical strength. Halting before the Demacians, he touched the palm of his left hand to his forehead, then extended it to the sky. Cytheria clasped her hand around the hilt of her sword, thinking he was performing some arcane conjuration, before realizing it was likely an Arbor Mark salute. Feeling her cheeks burn, she cursed herself for a fool. And later, the story said, Cytheria was surprised to find that the envoy from the Arbor Mark did not slow them, easily marching the punishing pace Gunthar set, his heavy staff striking the ground firmly with every step. The march took them across windswept moors and dales. The gale sweeping down from the frozen north chilled Cytheria to the bone. The Demacians trudged on, cinching their cloaks around their necks for additional warmth. Wrapped in bearskins, the envoy seemed unaffected by the weather. For all Cytheria's apprehension, Arjun was an affable and easily likable man. She forced herself to not be lulled into false sense of security, however. The ways of the arcane were full of deception and trickery. While the Demacians were tight-lipped and stoic, clearly uneasy around the mage, Arjun himself passed the time by telling stories of his homeland. Most of them involved loads of drinking of ale, feats of strength, and far-fetched heroics. But he had a gift for storytelling, and it certainly passed the time much better than silence. And then the great beast growled, "You don't come here for the hunting, do you?" it said. The big man guffawed with laughter at his own ribald joke, slapping one of his meaty thighs in mirth. Cytheria, marching just to the envoy's side, found herself smiling despite herself, even as she shook her head at the inappropriateness of the story. "You get it, lass," said Arjun, addressing Cytheria directly. "He says that because he thinks the man—" "Oh, I get it," said Cytheria, hastily holding up her hand to stop Arjun's explanation. And now, before we get into my number one pick, we need to go through a couple of honorable mentions. I wanted to put Raven on the list. But honestly, Raven doesn't have a unique take on his character. He is great and funny in all the stories, and we will likely see him in the Ruined King game. But he doesn't have any kind of ability that would make him stand apart as a champion. Then we obviously need to mention Cytherea. She instantly became a fan favorite. But unfortunately, just like Raven, unless Riot gives her a twist and something unique happens to her, I don't think she would fit the framework of a champion right now. And lastly, Ledros. Ledros already has more lore than some other champions, so he would be a great addition to the champion roster. On top of that, his broken half-ghostly blade makes him unique. But we already have quite a few knights in League, so in order for him to become a champion, he would probably have to get rid of his sword and shield. But now, with these characters mentioned, let's have a look at my number 1, which is Faye. Right now, Faye absolutely has the biggest potential for becoming a champion. And in fact, turning her into a champion would be very easy. Faye comes from the story The Bow and the Kunai, where she was the oldest kid among the Kinko, with one of the other kids being Akali. The relationship between Faye and Akali is already interesting. In short, Faye doesn't like her. As one of the youngest kids, Akali was always a bit too hasty and careless, but whenever she did something wrong, she quickly got sad as well. Usually her mistakes were that she didn't follow the plans Faye laid out for the other kids. For example, to prove themselves to the adults, Faye and the other kids prepared a perfect trap to catch a boar. And was it not for Akali, who literally just jumped on the back of that boar and rode it like a fun rodeo, they would have caught it. But by far the most controversial thing happened at the end of the story. And this is where Faye turned into a candidate for a champion. One day, the kids wanted to play games in an area further from the temple. There, they first noticed the Navori Brotherhood scouting the lands, but after these intruders left, the kids woke up a spirit guardian. This protector of nature was enraged, because after all the killing in Ionia, the spirit realm was imbalanced. And so it started attacking the kids by wrapping and strangling them with its roots. Without hesitation, because she was the fastest of them, Faye sent young Akali back to the temple to find some adults to help them. At first, Akali did run away, while Faye tried to keep the Guardian busy with her arrows. But a while later, instead of finding help, Akali returned and she started freeing all the strangling kids. Faye was mad for a while that Akali once again didn't follow her orders. But then, after seeing how quick Akali was and how well she was doing, Faye supported her with even more arrows. Still, despite it all looking bright for a while, this encounter had a bad ending. The spirit caused an earthquake, which made a small avalanche of stones crush Faye's lower body. When she was brought back to the temple, they had to cut off one of her legs to save her. And this is where the story turns really unique. You see, Faye blamed Akali for the loss of her leg. If she followed the orders, none of this would have happened, despite the fact that without Akali they wouldn't save the other kids. On top of that, Faye was trained to succeed Akali's mother as the next Fist of Shadow. But now, all that hard work was thrown out the window. And the best twist in all of this? Akali's mother swore to Faye that they would find a way to give her her leg back. And that was the cliffhanger of that story. Interestingly, if you ask me, there is only one place where they can replace your limbs: Zaun. So, I would love to see an Ionian Kinko ninja archer with a mechanical Zaunite leg as a champion in the game. Surely, there would be no one else like her. And the best part is that ninjas are popular. Akali is popular, so Faye will be too. Riot, Faye would sell you a lot of skins.